From Vassar College, this is Conversations at the Salt Line with Wesley Dixon.
Hey everyone, it's me, Wes, and we're here with the special edition of Conversations at the Salt Line. This episode is very different for you and for me, in part because there's no guest. And we are going to do a recap of what we're calling season 1 of the podcast. So season 1, to give you definitions, Vassar folks love definitions, started in November of 2022 and ended in July of 2023. Yeah, that's right. This is going to be very raw and unedited, just so you all know, because there's no guest and there's no pressure to be perfect on this version of the podcast. But we thought it would be super interesting, and I got a lot of requests from people to sort of do just a little wrap up of season 1. Tell you all who was on the podcast, remind you who's on the podcast, highlight some key things from our conversations, give you a little bit of behind the scenes stuff that happened with some of the guests, and just sort of punctuate what was, I think, an incredible first year of the Vassar Salt Line podcast. So I know you're tired of hearing my voice. I apologize for having it just be my voice. I did invite my producers, Craig and Jim, to join this sort of recap. They didn't want to do it. They're sitting here, but they don't want to be on camera, and that's fine. So it'll just be me for this convo. But in November, we started the podcast with Eddie Glaude, professor at Princeton, and that was an incredible conversation. I loved it personally. We dropped it in November, even though we recorded it in September, I believe, because we wanted it to align with the midterm elections that were happening that month. And Eddie's conversation was so appropriate for that time. Of course, he's written extensively on democracy. He's talked a lot about society, American history. And, you know, he was a perfect guest, particularly at that time. And he's always a great guest. He spoke in poetic terms. In fact, what stuck out to me about that episode was his commentary on radical love and the need for radical love and healing our democracy, other societies. And I think that is just as true today as it was when we talked almost a year ago. So that was an incredible way for us to start the podcast. The second episode came out in December. I can't quite remember when we filmed it, in part because we filmed it twice. That was with Judy Jew, and Judy was incredible. She recorded with us from her home in London on Zoom, but we recorded it twice because here at Vassar we had a fire alarm that went off on the first attempt of the recording, so we had to record it 2 times. We tried to pick up where we left off, and for those who watched the podcast on video, you definitely can tell I have a different clothing outfit on during that video, but nonetheless it was an incredible podcast. For those who don't know, Judy is a formerly trained chef. She has been on Iron Chef UK. She has a couple of restaurants, 2 in London and 1 in Vegas. Side note, I happened to go to the restaurant in Vegas and the one in London, actually. The restaurant in Vegas is in the Aria Hotel, and the one in London is in Canary Wharf, and they're both wonderful. That was her Soul Bird sort of Korean street food restaurant, and they're just absolutely incredible. But it was great talking to Judy, in part because as many of you all know, food and culture come with stories of history, and sometimes, you know, hard histories to swallow. And we talked a lot about Korean food in particular, because Judy is a Korean American trained chef, the history of the Korean War and how that influenced things like the proliferation of things like Spam, or how Korean fried chicken is sort of a great cultural marriage between American soldiers in Korea. And so, wonderful conversation. In fact, what I remember most about the Judy conversation is the stories that come with food. She mentioned that when she was in culinary school, she was cooking a fish and she cut the tail off the end of the fish. And someone in the class said, "Judy, why are you doing that?" And she couldn't tell them why. And she went back and asked her mom, said, "Mom, you know, why did I cut the fish off? You always did it. I learned from you. That's what I did in school." And her mom said, "Well, Judy, we cut the end of the fish off because we only had a pan that fit the fish once we cut the tail off." And so it was a wonderful sort of story of just the family and personal history that are associated with food. So I really enjoyed talking to her. In January, to start the new year, we recorded with Jason Blum of Blumhouse Productions, of course, the Vassar Board of Trustees, and just an incredibly successful producer in Hollywood. We had a wonderful conversation. At that time, there was no writer strike. There was not the sort of ecology in Hollywood that we have right now, but we did talk about the influence of streaming, both in the horror genre, but also just in the general industry overall. And it's interesting because obviously for those who have watched and listened to the news as of recent, this is October of 23, there's been much to say about the role of AI in writing, and just sort of the way that Hollywood will operate in the future. Among other streaming services, the role they play in that. And so Jason and I's conversation was incredibly, I don't want to call it foreshadowing. We didn't talk anything about this, but I do think we sort of felt like there was things are coming to a head in terms of the business model of Hollywood and production. And I think in part we saw some of the implications of that over the summer with the various strikes happening in Hollywood. Loved talking to Jason. In fact, we had the privilege of going to his house out here in Connecticut right after the episode aired, and it was a great, fun dinner. We talked a lot about some cool Hollywood drama that I can't say here on the show, but it was a wonderful dinner with Jason and his friends, so thanks for hosting us, Jason. In February, we had J. Charles Johnson on the set, and he was wonderful. I mean, of course, to have been the Secretary of Homeland Security was just an incredible role that he had, among others, in his career. And it was really insightful to hear Secretary Johnson talk about, frankly, the pressures of being in public office and the difficulty of making certain decisions when you have limited information at a certain time and have limited time to make said decision. Personally, I deeply appreciated his honesty about some of the things that he might have done differently, some of the things that were hard for him to swallow in his role, but have incredible respect for someone who grew up locally here in Wappingers Falls, grew up on Vassar's campus in some ways because his father was a professor here at Vassar for a long time, and was able to, despite not doing well in college at his own admission, succeed incredible amounts in his own professional and personal life, and having him on the podcast was an incredible honor. I will say one thing that I enjoyed learning about Secretary Johnson in our conversation was that he has an affinity for trains, and he showed us his train set afterwards. He emailed me a picture of his train set, and my father loves trains, and we have a train set at the house in Florida too, so it was incredible to find those points of connection with him. And I will say there's a theme that I think I have appreciated running through all the guests and all the episodes is finding points of connection across incredible other differences in our lives. Finding things that connect us together has been a fun part of the podcast, and hope that you've been able to hear some of those connections and find them among yourself and the guest as you listen to the episodes. In March, we had Vassar alum David Ambrose on the podcast. He had just released his new book, memoir, I should say, called A Place Called Home. David had an incredibly moving and difficult story to sort of course, hear, but also certainly to live in his shoes. He experienced extreme homelessness, was in the foster care system for much of his childhood years. I don't remember the exact number of homes he lived in, but just incredible numbers of households he lived in. And frankly, again, in his words, sort of learned behaviors that were, what we would think about as not savory, but I think in the context of his situation, it made sense why he had to sometimes lie and steal to sort of get food or to get by or to find a place to sleep. And so I deeply appreciated sort of the face and the texture and the context around issues of homelessness in the foster care system that David illuminated in our conversation. And if you go back and listen to that episode, he articulated some very particular policy agenda items that he himself and people he works with are fighting for, but I think also highlighted things that we as individuals who may not have experienced homelessness or foster care but might care about it deeply can do to affect positive change. So I deeply appreciated talking to David. In April, we had Stacey London. We actually recorded her almost a year before the drop date of the episode. She was, I think, actually our first recorded guest in this studio. And I say that in part, so it's really funny. So if you remember the episode, or if you go back and listen to it, Stacey talked a lot about her transition from being in fashion and media to running a menopause company, a company that worked on menopause products and advocacy for women to destigmatize menopause in their lives, which is, of course, very important, very admirable. And she was very helpful and clear in articulating the need for said business and said company. But what's funny about it is she recorded in the studio probably in March of the year before, April the year before, and the studio was not done yet. Vassar is an old place. The buildings are old, and the studio did not have AC when we first recorded her episode. And so she was talking about menopause. I don't know if she was going through it at that time or not, but she was talking about menopause. And we were talking for a long time, and she was sweating. And she said to me, "Oh my gosh, Wes, I'm so sorry. I must be having like a hot flash or something." The truth was, it was not her. It was our room. We had no AC. I was hot. I was sweating. It was not obvious on me, but she sort of said that it was her. And so I think I might have told her that it was not her. It might have also been her. Who knows? But it was a very fun, appropriate situation, given the topic of the conversation. But she was wonderful. And I've since seen Stacey on Instagram and in the world partnering with many other influential people to continue to sort of destigmatize and educate not only women, but the world generally about not only menopause, but the different stages of menopause before and after. And she's just incredible and was a great guest on the show. In May, we had Vassar alum Suzanne Lyons, who is the former chair of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, and she was so dynamic. And we talked about everything, cultural diplomacy, sort of the neutrality of sports generally, how sports and politics and advocacy and activism intersect. And it was so fun talking to her. I had no clue the range of influence that the chair of the U.S. Olympic Committee had, not only abroad, but also domestically. And it was insightful to understand the role that this volunteer position has in navigating many thorny issues, social and political, in this country and others. So loved having Suzanne on. In June, we had Sasha Velour. Our students loved Sasha. She was on campus for things before the podcast. She was kind enough to come sit in the couch or sit in these chairs with us and chat. And I had so much fun talking to Sasha about a number of different things. She had just written and released a book as well about the history of drag. And, it was fun delving into that. Of course, we talked about drag brunch. Sasha is not a fan of drag brunch. It's a little too commercial to say it in an expedient way, but understand sort of how and why it's helpful for the artist. In fact, drag artists can depend upon drag brunches to get paid pretty well. And so despite it being maybe the lesser on the artistic stage of drag, it is helpful for the pockets of those who perform drag. But our conversation was much more than that. There was so much history about the history of convo about the history of drag, sort of how drag is particularly important at that time and still now, given the national and state conversations around anti-LGBTQ and transgender expression and those kinds of movements in certain states. And so drag has a particular social role continuing to tell the stories of folks who are marginalized, make clear that the drag community is one of harmony, of love, of non-bullying, and so it was such a timely conversation to have. And then we finished the year on the podcast with an episode from Margaret Peggy Hamburg, who is the former commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration here in America, and has many other former roles and accolades under her belt. But it was incredibly interesting to sort of talk to someone who knows sort of inside the sausage-making process of our country's approval of foods and drugs. And of course, for anyone who is, steeped in pop culture or sort of just reads the news or reads different society pages, over the summer, there's been a lot of talk about Ozempic and drugs like Ozempic and the effect they have on people. And so to have an insider perspective from someone like Peggy Hamburg about the process by which certain kinds of drugs make their way to the American public was a priceless experience to have. And of course, she has a incredibly moving personal connection to that. Her mother, per per the records, is the first woman who applied to and graduated Vassar as a Black woman, and that was a history that I think wasn't always known, wasn't always put on a pedestal. And so I think we had a great conversation about reckoning with history, learning new history, adjusting our thinking as we learn new things. So as you can see, we had an incredibly wide range of guests on season 1 of the podcast. There were many, many salt lines that emerged from numerous conversations. And also, if you sort of take some of these guests in juxtaposition with each other, I think new salt lines can emerge as well when we think about the different ways that our guests perceive the world, explore the world, and think about their profession and their lives. There's always new insights we can make from this conversation. So I had a great time. The podcast is very fun for me. You all make it very fun. Whenever I'm on the road for Vassar alum and others, always comment on the podcast and have incredibly helpful feedback or reflections or ideas. And please keep those coming. We are sort of a dynamic, living show. We are in the world and excited to sort of be responsive to what's happening in the world, and you all's feedback help us do that really, really well. So thank you for your engagement. Season 2 is going to be great too. We've already recorded a number of episodes for season 2. They're going to come out once a month over the course of the next few months until the end of the academic year. But there's a lot in store for season 2. Similar dynamic guests with ranges of different professional background. There are folks who have a lot of visual skill that we'll explore, lots of just different kinds of experience that are going to be on the podcast. And I would love to hear from you all too. So if you have ideas of guests that should be on the podcast, Vassar or otherwise, that you want to suggest, or topics that you want to explore that might help us find some guests, please let us know. You know how to find me. You can Google my name at Vassar. You can figure out my email address. But I'm happy to sort of get ideas and feedback and thoughts, but love the engagement. Love how you all just remember every word I say and don't let me get away from that when I might have said something that you didn't agree with or thought was a little bit in politic. I'm okay with that too. We are exploring some ideas about how to maybe even incorporate some alumni or other listener sort of vignettes or voicemails or thoughts as commercials in the podcast. So I don't want to say to do that yet because I don't have the process for how we can accept that yet, but somehow we will let you know how you can have your voice included on the Saltline podcast as well. So thank you all for listening. Hope you stay engaged. Hope you enjoy it, and look forward to hearing your thoughts about season 2 that's coming up very soon. Talk to you all soon. Have a great one. Bye. On the next episode of Conversations at the Salt Line, you're going to hear from Vassar alum, class of 77, Chip Reid, former chief White House correspondent for CBS News and author of the new book, Battle Scars, which details his time with the 3-5 Marine Battalion in Iraq as they went from Kuwait into Iraq as part of the Iraq War. An incredibly moving conversation, tough at times to be clear, but such a privilege to hear from someone who's at the front lines, literally, of American democracy, journalism, and foreign affairs. Hope you enjoyed the episode.